tale of OPEX begins, I guess, when it wasn't even called that. The thought of OPEX and the naming of it, it wasn't even an idea in 1992. I'm starting from there because prior to, I guess, the date of the exact naming of OPEX, which was actually like 2012, 2013, I think, we had to change from OPT. Even pre-OPT was just me, 1992. I was graduating high school, and I had an injury playing soccer, and that led me into, I guess, two major areas, this transformative thing in terms of identity, athlete identity versus human identity. I really, for better or for worse, became very introspective, cerebral, and largely in the end nihilistic with regards to humans and human behavior. At the same time, this idea of physicality, and physical training in my rehab and getting back to, understanding that I was stronger post-rehab, as a human than I was, as an athlete up till 1992. So that's the stepping stone and the base that all you as coaches need to know, which goes into, I'm sure you could see how all the things are laid out with regards to the education of OPEX and to where we're ending up to today in 2025. That's a pretty good run. But you could say 1992 to 2022 would be 30 years. Coaches to know about the history and where all things come from. Some who have been in CCP may have heard me talk about that for coaching career. I've said that in numerous ways. Remember the 30 years and impacting only 100 people which you really know their names. You remember that? That's a pretty good run. And of course, doing this project, which is to kind of culminate these different sections of timelines to help you as coaches better understand the story. Try to make it as factual as possible and less opinionative or culturally influenced. Just want to give some storyline and a timeline perhaps of the OPEX story. And I thought about it, I even wrote down make sure I stick to calling it OPEX throughout, but I can't. And the reason why I wanted to do that is to make it, I guess, more understandable for coaches. But I think it takes away from the history, because before OPEX was OPT. Before OPT was just James. It's got nothing to do with admonition of my abilities or where things came from, but more truth around what's the actual starting points and the end points, like 1992 broken leg to CoachRx today. And it's good for coaches to know about that. Also previously had, through some good advice from the people at OPEX, feels like I am somewhat removed from quote unquote a head office. But when I say that, it's over text and meeting with Candace, to kind of lay out a specific chapter of each area of these different locations and different happenings to build on it. And the more I thought about it and the more time I spent on it, I just spent some time with my family in Colina, which is just north of Honolulu, for 7 days over the quote unquote break, and I had lots of time to think about laying out what would be most helpful. And I've come to the conclusion that it's just going to be a one-shot recording to try to capture, those pieces as best as possible, so that in 2025, and the coach is listening in to this, it gives you a better background in case you don't know who am I and how was I connected to starting of some pieces, as well as some interesting stories along the way. What led into what would be an education program, and then what leads into the requirement just within the fitness universe for digitization and how it passed, quote unquote, an online scenario. And I always think, I'm biased on this, but I always think it's kind of nice to talk about the truth behind this very high speed transition in society with the speeding up of social connection through the digitized world. And we were, as I've told the story, I'm so grateful that I was able to live through this time. There's still so many very exciting things that are going to happen. We have a small part to play in that, but with artificial intelligence and digitization, it's pretty cool that we're alive to experience that. And hopefully if you're a coach today, it may be helpful for you to reflect on that. Hopefully I can give you a story or mention something interesting that as a coach, for example, 1999, 2000, I was pen and paper. Actually, it was erasable pen and paper. That's program design. I would put actually, ranges, set scenarios. You can imagine everything, and pictures. I would put pictures together, and I was known in the YMCA and in my private consultations throughout that time for the pictures that I would draw right next to the exercise selection. I would write out specific long-term plans for endurance athletes. So the broken leg in 92, I'm going to categorize as I've done on paper just to remind myself, 1992 to 1998 is this, through the help of Candace's wording, which is kind of a great way to think of it, is like an academic timeline is the word that I thought about for that kind of timeline, where I was in Wabash, Labrador, or St. John's, Newfoundland. Those are both within the same province, but it's kind of hard to get everyone on board with saying I was in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. If you're from there, you understand that. And I had done education from 92 to 94 up in Labrador. That was still part of Memorial University of Newfoundland. And then 94 to 98, mid-98 in St. John's, Newfoundland. We're calling that the academic years. And it's important for me to reflect upon those times for you, because there was, I guess, two, main things going on at the time. There was this explosion in the concept of professionalization of a fitness professional. Okay. And there wasn't a perfect naming for it, but in the quote unquote fitness universe was just handed this kind of like accreditation, fitness is more than just performance concept. Okay. And I'm not going to nail the numbers, but for those who are, just starting out today or 2025, or those who have been around for a while and are just reminiscing, there used to be only 2, maybe 3 quote unquote, well-accepted universal designations of fitness professionalism. Okay. I could be wrong and it could have been 5, but you just need to know. It's a very interesting thing to think about. Let's just say let's fast forward and say that I didn't really put pen to paper till 2008, 2009 for what was CCP then. Just think about that timeline. That's like 13 years later, I was on which seemed like an early adopter to something of an education program in fitness that was different. But we were, quote unquote, OPEX was amongst, I would say, 1,000 by that point, quote unquote, fitness education, fitness professional education scenarios. Now, it may not seem to you as like to be 1,000, but when you're in the thick of things and you're in that area and you're doing all the conferences and you're in the fitness universe, there was 1,000, let me tell you. Now, there could, in people's minds, there may only been like a top 5 or top 6. And I'd be very thankful if anyone ever recognized us at that time for being it, which we weren't, but I think we were in a top 10 of like those out there who are doing something different for fitness education. Just think about that, right? Just think about that. So I mentioned that at that time because for you as coaches, it's a good reflection. It's a good reflection to kind of think about the analog aspect of it, right? For coaches to reflect today and say, in 1994, how would you get clients? Now it was fairly easy. And the reason why it was easy because everyone was like, oh, coach. Yeah, I heard coaches are good. Can I work with you? This is basically the word on the street, and you just, everyone in your community or local nearby just was talking about it because there wasn't, people were just starting up that idea, right? Fitness wasn't accepted as we talk about like breakfast. It wasn't. It was like, oh, gee, this is something that I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to do, and I have the funds to afford some professional advice on it. So, hey, let's do it. But it's important to know that at the time that wasn't there, that wasn't available. And if you were to reflect upon that, again, like getting clients, maybe someone could, who kind of got into the thick of things and you're listening into 2019. And I use that pre-COVID because 2019 was I would call it like the apex of all this questioning around online marketing, really online marketing for yourself and client acquisition. The games changed tremendously. So let's just take that broad view from 1999 to 2019. 20 years is a long time, only in the digital universe context, right? But 20 years is not a long time for knowledge and knowledge gained that are truthful things in fitness. So that's a broad, changes that were made, and it's good for coaches today to reflect upon that. So that was called the academic timeline. Now, if the next phase would be 1998 to 2003 for coaching at that time, not a major amount of changes were occurring with regards to the previously mentioned top 3 to 5 quote unquote education systems or what to do. Okay. So now at this time, if you were to use me as an example, and I'll just use it because I know my story, but I would be an exemplar of a bunch of different people at this time who were, let's just call it, educated adults that wanted to get into the professionalization of fitness and coaching of it. 1998 to 2003, I called it vocation. If phase one was academia, this is called vocation. The reason for that is that it was gangbusters for the professionalization of coaching and fitness. I've thought about this lots, but I'm pretty clear on this statement now that I'm at my end of the profession and I'm not in the fitness arena anymore, or the fitness universe or the fitness game, and not a lot of thoughts in fitness anymore in this brain. I do think that I was a part of a massive movement of what we know today to be fitness. Wasn't my doing, but I was along for the ride of 1998 to 2003 of being so many things went down. You can just imagine the amount of things that went down from, culturally, 1998 to 2003, no matter where you are, the post-web disaster, but like spinning up of all these new versions of, I forget what the internet was called, the free, I forget what the naming of it was, but Web 1.0 was like, information sharing and connecting, online. That's what's happening at that time too. So that partnered with this whole professionalization of it. For me at that time, I don't know any other way to say it, but it was a blur. It was a blur of so many conferences that I went to and attended, so much coaching and consultation, so much just work. That's why I called it the vocation timeline. Now, OPT was named in 1999 as I started that up in Calgary, my post-university years, because I was doing, private consulting at different gyms and full-time work at a specific gym, and just so much that was going on. And I guess it's a nice reflection for those who are coaches listening in that want to reflect back as to what it was like at the time. Work was everywhere, and you really, really had to mess up, like really bad, to not get lots of work as a fitness coach then. Like you had to do, you can just imagine, I won't go into it, but you had to do some stupid stuff to not be successful as a coach at that time. Successful meaning like nonstop work availability, selection of clients everywhere, lineups, wait lists, you name it. And it was at that time where, OPT developed some kind of concept, build a business card. You have your own laptop. Remember that first Dell laptop was like, I guess it was really like, if I reflect upon what it's like to get ChatGPT, answers today, that's what it was like. That is like, holy moly, for efficiency and, emailing people in China, mind blowing stuff at the time. So at this time, that kind of professionalism of coaching was huge. Now just trying to pause to see, I'll just say universally. Now, I largely mean the Western world, and I largely mean only, what was happening in Canada and North America for what I'm speaking to. I hope I can make sense when I say this. So universally at that time, as I said, the coaching profession was rampant, and culturally for fitness, these were the starting points of what we know today as this quote unquote shift that occurred then in this well-accepted version of fitness, okay? So for the historians and the purists, really up until this point, I don't want to speak for them, but this is my reflection upon it. And I was, again, inside the wave, not attributing my efforts to this, but I was a part of being inside of that. There's something you can do besides machines, the universal machines and VO2 max testing. You can just imagine cycling classes, using bands, for multiple different scenarios for a full body workout, having someone, Juan Carlos Santana, presenting on stage for 90 minutes, dripping in sweat and just like smashing us with like body weight activities. So, it was an opportunity for this. And so some would say it was the functional movement, right? Where Paul Chek would get up and parade people who are using machines. And this is the big thing, like the online forums at the time, which was like dark fitness, let's call it, dark underground fitness. There would be threads like 100 pages long around free weights versus machines. Maybe no one finds that funny, but I give you that story to make you recognize this proliferation of versions and multiple new versions of what fitness is. Now, so those who are connected to the CrossFit world that do remember this was the starting point. Greg was a part of that. I'm not going to speak for Greg, but I think he was hearing this or listening to it or seeing it happen, or he could have been a builder of some of the ideas. You never know. I have to take his comments on that in order to, where it sits. But yeah, you could see it was like, you don't have to just do the traditional resistance, which was research from a lab and academia and kind of held, in that grouping. Now there was people like, well, maybe you don't have to do 5 sets of this at this percentage. And they called that quote unquote, functional fitness. So and it wasn't just functional fitness. My point is, Pilates, explosion of what was a thing in that. And at that time, you can just then imagine me as a practitioner. It doesn't mean that every practitioner did this, but at the time I did this. I looked at all of them and was like, oh, this is interesting. Try this out, do this, and then apply it to the clients I was working with. Remember, my base support was still the academics, right? From the scientific aspect of muscle physiology and muscle fatigue, and the central governor theory was starting its, Tim Noakes and the South African group at the time but remember, that's all performance model, or what I call the sports paradigm model, right? So tying all these new options, I was trying to figure out how this worked for people, humans that came to me and said, oh, you're the professional. I want to be more fit. What do we do? I'd be like, I'm handing out these ideas. And I was selective. I think I did a pretty good job of not getting too hot and deep into one particular idea. I was always able to, I think, look back and look at all the approaches and say, what are the principles inside of each of those things? I would, for example, look at a yoga class and my brain would be able to say things like, that's the time under tension for the shoulders. And, this is going to be the consequences of too much extension of the low back. And these are the muscle endurance muscles that they're training, yet those muscles should be used in a more powerful, high threshold, higher tension involvement. See, these are the things that were going on in my head as I saw these things, right? So I was able to look at all these ideas. So I was able to kind of step back and look at those and say, how is this going to apply to the vocation, right? How am I going to apply this to the clients? And this is as you can imagine, I have no idea around what is a systemized version of a generalized assessment to put people in place. This wasn't even thought of at the time. At the time, it was all service, all designed, because remember, we have so many options, so many people to choose from. Everyone wanted it, and there'd be the odd duck that would do stuff on their own and be okay. And then there'd be the odd duck who'd do stuff on their own, do the quote unquote new functional trendy thing and get hurt. And they'd end up in our place anyways. But we became that. And I speak to this. I don't know if coaches remember creating language at this time, because I was also creating a deeper relationship with one of my mentors in my life, Bernie Nowakowski, at this time. He was a client at the time. And what I shared with him with regards to my philosophies on physicality and human physicality, and its connection to work and, maximum physical potential, he was sharing with me these ideas on thinking, higher order thinking, and what that means in fundamental systematics. And I could piecemeal these pieces of all that was going on during this time, put together a kind of a starting point. Like as I mentioned, I teach coaches in CCP, or I taught coaches in CCP about the technician, the craftsman, and the master. This was the vocational time, right, for the craftsman, where I would step back, maybe be at a conference on a Sunday afternoon and just kind of reflect on, where I was. And I was feeling like I was telling people, like I say in the story, where someone gets in like, oh, you're up at the conference, what do you do? And I would say, I'm a coach. I'm a strength and conditioning coach, and this is what I do. That culminated 1998 to 2003, which was the really, quote unquote, where was OPEX or OPT or James at the time? Those were all the same thing. I was all over the place because I needed to be. Simple answer. And maybe some of those stories thus far of the academic timeline and the vocational timeline will, lead us on our way because the next phase was when I tell the story, and I always want to ensure that I'm not kind of making it emotional or kind of performative. But I really did then, after this foray, test the limits of my personal relationship with my girlfriend, not even fiance yet, Leanne at the time, of like going broke and going broke for, as the saying goes, doing it all on my own. We had been in our second home. We wanted to hang on to the home as a rental property, the first home that we purchased in Renfrew, community in Calgary. And I just, came home one day after the 5-year slog, I guess you could say, and told Leanne, I was like, I'm doing it. I'm going on my own. I'm doing this myself. And it's an intricate point for coaches to know in this story, like, because we all have those moments. I think we do, as you as coaches, where you question yourself and you're not really sure if you can do it, but you do know that the commitment to doing something that's bigger than you, that will eventually lead to your, demise, but it's because it's larger than you. That's what I went through at that time. And basically, when I would say we went broke, I had to, purchase all the equipment for a basement gym. The idea that came up when I was with Charles Poliquin in 1999 and 2000, 2001, working directly or indirectly with Charles and his crew of coaches at the time. There was really like maybe hundreds of coaches that were kind of in his thing, but there was like maybe 10 that were embedded in the system, coaches that he would like send hockey players to, or send hockey groups or different athletes to, say, oh, I got a guy up in Calgary, I go see him. I was in that kind of group at that time. My whole point on that was that I learned from that group of those coaches. They had already been 10 years in the mix, and they were telling me things like, you got to have a basement gym, or what was the quote unquote at the time, the garage gym. Had the payment system, the card swipe, which was like mind blowing to clients. I forgot to even mention that, all payment was taken through like cash or check, at this point. Just think about that, right? How seamless it is for payment, for something like Venmo, for someone to say something in 2003 about, the future, what Venmo will look like, it would have broken my brain. So I had this like portable machine that clients come to my basement, and I would have internet access, and it would be still the dial-up internet. So I have to hook it up, and I'd have it hooked up prior to the client's payment or during the session. At the end of the session, they give me the card, or after the program design, and I'd swipe it just like every time, just saying a small prayer to myself that it was going to work. Again, I give that story because it's important to reflect upon some of those moments that all coaches may have in really believing in something and committing to it, because I got to pat myself on the back. I decided to go for it against all odds. But, I guess it's only hindsight where I could say that it wasn't really, a chance of failing. But anyways, a great time. And man, I was making money, so much money, because you could just imagine all the private consulting stuff. I pretty much said 95% of my services were only in my basement. Okay. I did some private consulting, some coaching here and there, some private clients. I'd work with personal training in their home 2 to 3 times a week, charging grandiose amounts. We all know those moments are reasons that coaches do that. And I was making money, so much money, because I wasn't paying the house. All right. Wasn't paying the gym, I was getting small transactional costs, but I just put that into the front end costs. And remember, now this is almost a decade now into the practice of the coaching, at a time where we had so many client opportunities that I just continued to increase my prices, and I would continue to have a lineup. I would also continue to have good service, I would say. I think that was reflective in my success. And I thought, man, I'm going to be just like rolling like this and just stuffing cash in under the bed and into the walls for years, like decade. I was thinking a decade. So I called that timeline from 2003 to 2005 specialize. If the first phase was academia, the second phase was vocation, this phase was specialize, because I really specialized in that aspect of the craftsman, of moving from this person to doing all these things and trying to figure all these things out, kind of like getting focused. I'm sure coaches could appreciate that who have gone through that story, or maybe you're still trying to get to that area. And I would just say, keep going. But it's a special time. That's why it's called specialize, because you take on all this responsibility because you say, I'm doing this myself. This is my shit. And I did that 2003, 2005, my own basement, my own rules, my design, my decision for costs, my yes or no to clients, my schedule. I decided upon my schedule. And at the time in this, there could be a whole book written even on this for my relationship with my wife. But it was at that time where she was also looking at me, reflecting upon the kind of things I wanted to do. She knew the limitations that I was up against for the movements that I wanted to make. And the reason why this story is interesting, possibly for people who are entrepreneurs in business at that time, she was still working for the YMCA. And she would look at what I was doing being like, man, you need some support. And I would love to partner up with you and be a team to make this whole thing work for our future, for you and I, James and Leanne, but also for the ideas that we had in mind for family. So in this phase, 2003, 2005, I'm in my basement and I'm just working, but specializing on the craftsman and, starting to say things like, I'm building my system. This is how I do things. This is how I charge people. This is how I do service delivery to clients. And as I say that, you can also see why, and if anyone was to reflect upon, me in 2011 as to how I gained clients or went through client acquisition, it would be fairly a weak story because remember, I didn't have to do a lot of work to get clients. I just serviced people positively, built great relationships, and they just kept coming. Okay. And that's not the same for today. At this time, I was specializing and it really moved the needle on the foreshadowing of having to have a system in place, specifically for myself. Because the next phase, which was 2005 to 2011, I called it the phase of OPEX. And the reason why I called it the phase of OPEX, because in this phase, as I mentioned in specialized phase 2003, 2005, it was foreshadowing the system that went into what I called the CCP. And that was the centerpiece now in 2005 to 2011 in that phase. Didn't happen really until 2008, 2009 in terms of like pen to paper and kind of digging in on it. You could see how that timeline of all those consultations and all that work, 2003, 2005, how it kind of led into that. And it was also in that time, 2003, 2005. And I want to be cautious of, because I just personally don't think that my physical performance story really adds much to, in my opinion, to the whole OPEX storyline and tale. I mean, it's good to know that I was competing in CrossFit, competing in these other things physically, but it was at that time, 2003, 2005, where I started to get more serious with the CrossFit.com daily workouts in late 2003, full-time 2004. And then I melded all of that into my own versions of what it's going to offer clients. And I saw CrossFit as nothing more than that, just another, this is interesting. I can add it to the repertoire, not an answer to fitness, but a repertoire inside of fitness. That's the reason why that's kind of a timeline or a break anchor timeline is 2005. I recognized from being in the basement that things were so successful, meaning, wait times are longer, consistently increasing initial consult prices and design and personal training prices, and people still being like, no problem. Yep, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. I needed a bigger spot. So I had ideas of what I was implementing in 2003 to 2005 for my own basement, what I had done with other, trainers on quote unquote someone else's team, but they were all working together with me in 1999 to 2003, is I wanted to create other coaches to be a part of my team, and the basement wasn't going to do it. So 2005, we went up to what was, if anyone wants to do the storyline on, you can watch Every Second Counts. It gives you just a picture really of like what OPT was, this little house next to my house on acreage that we had in Bears Paw, which is a northern community in Calgary, and had a little bit of like, I wonder if people are going to drive out of the city to come up there. But man, we worked that place, let me tell you, because it was also at that time where within that timeline where Brett Marshall bought CrossFit Calgary, and we offered classes inside that little OPT. You can just imagine freezing nights, 1,600 square foot little house with all open floor for equipment and space and everything, holding classes, like 10 people doing quote unquote gangbuster CrossFit workouts. No runs, no outside because you'd freeze to death. The windows are just like crusted with sweat and moisture. 2005, 2011, I call that OPEX because that was the starting of this full development of, having a massage room with people consulting in that office over there, had $10,000 to $15,000 worth of inventory all the time at one time for supplements and supplement room, and my office for consulting, open floor for coaches to work there, program design going on all the time, CrossFit classes. I mean, I guess I used the word earlier, but it was the apex. It was like shit is rolling. Everything seemed to be working smoothly. If there was any hiccups, we'd be like, whatever, later, we'll move on. And it was during those times where meet me at conferences, or I was asked to now present at conferences and talk about, my system or my thing, right? This is what we do at OPT. That's what you would say, right? And when you get that question so often for a number of years, I just thought to myself, I really should put this, pen to paper. You can just imagine if you're a coach, right? If you review all the things that you unconsciously did that were really creative for people, and you looked at all the principles of those, you can imagine you're going to come up with something that you're going to be able to teach people. So this is what I did. In 2007, late 2007, started a blog online called Big Dogs, where I just basically, again, jumped on the wave of Web 2.0, right? Web 2.0 is this more than just the internet. It was internet plus content that you could share with people or individualize the content. By the way, Web 3.0 is internet sharing content and individual ownership and cost, right? Which you would see in a 2019 model of Instagram of a coach who can make money off that process, right? That's Web 3.0. Anyways, this was happening in this timeline, and all these coaches saying how is that successful? Why are you doing that? I was like, I'm going to put this together in some kind of format. And I took lots of time to think about what should go into the principles that I'd learned thus far. So let's say it was 2008. We'll just use that timeline. Blog, winning the CrossFit Games, over a decade now of non-stop work. I snicker at that, but I loved it, man. Talk about feeling alive. I was all gas, no break during that time. Great time. And I contemplated on all that timeline, all that work, and said, how could I, if I was to stand up in front of a room of all these people that were now consulting or asking questions like, how would you do? How do I do this? Why are you so happy with the job you're doing? What's the secret sauce? I was like, well, I would do, I think at the time we called it a lifestyle consulting. I would do a nutrition course. I would do an assessment course. I would do a business course, and I would do a program design course. So I came up with, quote unquote, the CCP of these 5, individual courses, which culminated in, if you did all 5 of them, you'd be a certified coach. Yeah. CCP. Great times. It's funny that I took an entire summer of writing, pen and paper. I still have the notes in the book of what went into the design of the entirety of CCP. That was done at Pigeon Lake, a cabin that my wife and I purchased in northern Alberta. And I used to get up because at the time we only had Hannah, and she was walking and active. And during our breaks in the summer up at the cabin, I would get up, go to this cafe, and I'd have breakfast there and coffee, write until noon. So 5-6 hours until they would serve lunch. And I would have lunch and coffee, and then I'd write for another couple hours, and then I'd go back to the cabin. And I did that for a summer. And I'll fast forward just in case I forget, but I did the same thing for mixed modal in a different timeline, but just wrote pen and paper. I have, I don't know, you may not be able to see it on the screen, but in the back here, I have 4 fairly thick binders of written notes. I wrote mixed modal out entirety. Same idea, right? It was just so much, practice so much, you go through so many things, and you think you have the system and all these answers. I didn't have the answers, but I thought I did. And you just write it all down. So that's why I call 2005, 2011 the building of OPEX, because that's when OPT CCP was organized. We had our first course up in Calgary, where I can still remember all the coaches. For any of you coaches that are listening in to this that were there, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, I appreciate your interest in what I had to share. As a personal note, just think about it. It's like 16 years later, 16 years after that, where I made people believe in that room that these were the answers, you know? Now, those people who are there and me today would say, well, they weren't the answers, but we really did believe they were. And in hindsight, it's easy for me to say, but a lot of people, you know, who were not fans of CCP would say that it was just me reacting to fitness intensity, the fitness intensity model, but it was more than that. It was more than that. I like to say that I transcended and included all those things and put it into the CCP. Yeah, that's where we came up with all these things, right? Well, the language of, you can just imagine everything you hear today with get comfortable with uncomfortable, assess, don't guess. All the OPEX language, it was built at that time up on Aspen Drive in Calgary in that building because of those years of experience, because of the time. Ample opportunity for coaching. Professionalization is just beginning. So much opportunity. And again, we're still in, you know, this web 2.0 starting point, right? Because for those who are coaches today, 2025 and reflecting back, there's no such thing as Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or Rumble, YouTube. You know what I mean? So it's important to reflect upon that time, you know, pen to paper, 5 courses, all in person. So you can imagine all the traveling that was to come for me to, you know, I guess all the coaches who taught at the time would get on the circuit. You know, I remember speaking to Mark Ripito about this. He would say, yeah, it's great. People want to learn about these things. Downside is I got to go to all these places. Yeah, but it was great. Now, the next phase, 2011 to 2015, I hope I gave a storyline to build up to that point, and it feels like there should be a drum roll, but that was the move. And I would say that was like the anchor point and the transition into OPEX that most people know today. Because in 2011 to 2015, we sold all the OPT assets. We kept the education and kept the online blog and training. Okay. So now we're in the US in this current position, Scottsdale, Arizona, 2011, August 2011, second hottest month on record in the Valley. Great transition. It was just me and Max because I remember I was the only one up in front teaching the courses, and I was writing the blog and doing the online program because the online programming had started in the year 2000. I was doing online program design. Remember, I was doing all that work from 98 to 2003, just like everything. I was also being coached and experimenting with Charles Staley, Charles Poliquin, Dave Tate, Paul Check. You know, all these people coached me online with their own version of what their individual online program design. And I was also doing it to a bunch of people. We were experimenting with this concept of what was called the internet at that time, connecting with other people. It's like, I don't need to do just training in person. I can do these things online. And I was part of that starting point. And now at 2011, 2015, when I moved down here, it was just me and Max. Max was a former client, and I knew that he was interested in, he'd said he's interested in what he was doing. I think apologize if I'm wrong, at CrossFit Delray, or maybe his own consulting as well at the time, but that he wanted to, you know, do it with us or me in Scottsdale. So he moved over from Florida, and it was just him and I, you know, doing the blogs. He did a lot of program design for me for online clients. We kind of started that like group of individuals in person that wanted to compete in CrossFit together, continued to grow the education, and started the process of now doing some online coaching, not only for individual coaching, but really professionalizing the quote unquote big dogs concept in professional coaching and education in that online format. And this was 2011. It's a good reflection for two people in 2025 to know the building of where things came from. We had, you know, Tathlons, which were just called a fitness event that OPEX was now designing. Our name changed from OPT to OPEX because of right of first usage by Michael Clark and his group in NASM down in America. So we're just like, Matt, we'll just change the name. But we kept those basics in place, right? The online blog, reaching out to the world and tell them all these things, right? Which is the place for like to learn that CCP was coming up and all the courses, to do some individualized training online with us, and to get a good workout, right? So we had those 3 main areas just like captured. Now, it wasn't just us doing it. I would say that we were one of few within the, I guess at the time it was called the functional fitness universe, that was doing that. And we got a good following and we had lots of success. And CCP was at this time rolling, people doing the life coaching course as an example at this time, doing the life coaching course and just really just changing people's lives. I don't know any other way to say it. It sounds cliche, but not just these coaches' lives, but coaches would leave with like, oh my gosh, like this is the answer. When you can not find the answers too, but come up with like methods to communicate better with people, to talk about purpose and meaning and how to put all things together. That was an example of like, impactful things that OPEX was into doing at that time. And I called this phase 2011, 2015 USA because it was largely due to the hub and being in Phoenix, for people traveling in and out, being inside the USA market for CrossFit, being inside the USA market for the online presence and the people that we could serve. Called it USA. And just for shits and giggles, we'll call it USA, USA, USA. Personally, it's also the time where my wife and I started our process of transitioning over to American citizenship, because at the time we just went through this like 5-year process of visas, this new kind of visa every 5 years, but it was a starting process. So call it USA at that time. And we were in a very small, just think of it as like we were inside of a naturopathic holistic center. And we were the far like hallway on the side of that center. So it's a pretty huge center, but it was beautiful, like super clean, had our own education studio. I mean, for those who weren't there, didn't experience it, I don't know. Like maybe people can remark on it. I won't see the comments, by the way, but man, like you weren't going to find a more professional place to have an education course. It was in Scottsdale, Arizona, medical center. You can imagine people like going into gyms and doing courses, right? And this is what we had to offer. It definitely set us apart. Not on purpose, just is what it is. We decided to go there, but we would hold education courses there. It was awesome. It was awesome. Also our connection with the doctors and, it just kind of ramped up our ability to think about things like assessment, diagnostics and health and holistic care and the sports medicine paradigm, the connection of everything, right? We were right there inside of that. And this was on Raintree, right? Our quote unquote first in Arizona. As a reminder, just to go through the facilities, 92 to 98. It was just academic, so I didn't even have one. Works didn't have one. OPT didn't have one. 98, 2003, I was everywhere in Calgary. 2003, 2005 was in my basement. 2005 to 2011 was on Aspen Drive. And now 2011, 2015 was at Raintree. And during this time for coaches, what's particular for coaches to know, it was the refining of CCP. Because you can just imagine through practice of the courses, people are being like, that wasn't good. I didn't learn that. Or, my gosh, like that was fascinating. Just imagine thousands and thousands of that feedback, right? Of like, it was way too much money for the value provided, to the other extreme, which would be like, oh my gosh, like this is a game changer course. At the time too, again, we're in Web 2.0 where you got to do your work to kind of get out there and tell people. It's because it's now at the point now where there's other educational systems, right? So probably at this time, I would say, yeah, I'll stay with that number. There's like 1,000 at this time of different versions of, similar kinds of ideas that we were doing, fitness education, what it looked like, quote unquote weekend course. If today it's actually probably less than that, but it's so broad and specialized and online and efficient and et cetera. As an example, there's probably 10,000 versions of that today. If there was like 5 in 98, there was like 1,000 in 2011, and we were one of that. And there's like 10,000 in 2025. Okay. Just to kind of give you a timeline scenario of those educational opportunities for a coach. So you can imagine we're not struggling to get coaches, but because of my experience in CrossFit and what I was bringing to the fitness world in the blog and online coaching and the system that I built, because the system that I built wasn't based on, I just reflected on all my years in CrossFit and this is what I did. No, it was reflective, remember, of everything I had done up to learning about CrossFit. I tell the story all the time just because people just need to know that. I had done 10 years of work of like whatever was my own thing before I even started CrossFit. And that's when CCP was designed in my head, right? So you use that, the winning of the games, along with my experience just coaching in the trenches, developing the CCP. We were refining it 2011, 2012, 2015, changing instructors, changing business structure, adding more coaches to the online world, adding more coaches to the CCP world to do it with me, adding more people to quote unquote OPEX at the time and its building of it. By the time 2015 came around, we were again busting out of our doors. When we had employees working in the education center because we didn't have space for them over in the gym, and we had, I guess you could call them full-time athletes who lived in the area that trained there. I just give that story to kind of recognize that you're kind of pushing yourself out. So we bought a different place, and that transitions into 2016 to 2022, which I call the global era. And I'll explain in more detail what that means for that. 2016 to 2022, we left Raintree, because remember now it was academia, vocation, specialize, OPEX, USA, now it was global. We had just left Raintree from 2011 to 2015. And between 2016 and 2022, we went over, I think it was called 92nd Street, which is nearby, 92nd. And then we just opened up a larger portion of 92nd. And then we moved again to the huge monster of a place. I forget what the name of the street was. Anyways, it was 15,000 square foot. Those who would know who did some in-person stuff with us here, just monster location, to a smaller location down the street. That all happened in 2016 to 2022, right? But it was all within the North Scottsdale area. That's why I kind of classify that. And I called it global because during that time, CCP went worldly. And it was during this time where we started using True Coach in our practice. It was called Fitbot at the time. Started True Coach as our digital product that we were kind of connecting coaches with clients. And at the same time, just exploding the online, in our mind, exploding our online presence for coaching individuals and a team of coaches who did that and then taught around the world. I was in frickin' Singapore, England. I did a lot of traveling during that time, so much so that my wife and daughter, Hannah, were doing a bunch of traveling for tennis. And they were so impressed by their miles and, just kind of in conversation saying, oh, here. And they're talking about, oh, we went here. And I was like, oh, yeah, I've been to Australia 5 times. So as I reflect upon how much traveling I did, because we were really refined now for CCP in our education, and we went not only in person, but had online opportunities. So as a product, to make it super simple for coaches to recognize, you can imagine a refined process of all those years, right? From 2008 to now. So 10 years of like practicing this education program, right? And the web 3.0 is beginning, which is internet on top of production of content, on top of ownership of that production of content, right? We now were inside of that phase and we were early adopters, of course. So when that came about, we were like, okay, we're ready to rock and roll. We had in-person and online options for education and a refined decade of practicing where we're like, no, that's not going to work for this course. We've done this so many times. This works well. Coaches gave us feedback. We have, 1,000 reminders that, this worked really well. So we're going to continue to do that. We knew where to find coaches. We knew a price point. We kind of stuck to that range of where we sat. And the fitness world shaped around us, right? Not because of us, but they did. We're going to charge more, or we're going to charge less, or we're better than OPEX because of this, and we're less than OPEX because of this. And, we were inside of that transitioning and phasing of what today is known as online education. And we did it around the world. I mean, I remember being on some calls with coaches. Probably should have done some preempt work on this, but let's just say a lot of countries represented and hundreds of people on a call for we're educating, of a specific thing, and we had signups, I could be wrong in this one too, but just think about that, 30 to 50 coaches signing up a month for a $5,000 product for years. We were rolling, all thanks to our team that we had at OPEX and all those people, who you are, that put the effort into like selling that product of what OPEX CCP was and selling what the online coaching was, and then starting to sell this concept that OPEX came up with to put it in a gym format, to put these gyms in a particular area, and call them OPEX gyms, OPEX Atlanta, OPEX San Francisco, OPEX, this is the idea we had in mind for what that would look like, because we got to that end stage now of having a system in place that coaches could, and we were talking to coaches around business and how to offer best business. And then we kind of landed on, as we say, we stuck our stake in the ground as to what was best for people, individualized fitness. So when we jammed on that for many years and fought tooth and nail to kind of say, this is what we're going to do, with a lot of pressure. Believe me, there's a lot of background stories of the pressures that we went through, conversations we went through for that. But yeah, we were going to stick to that. And therefore, if you're going to put your stake in the ground and you got a system and a coaching system, an education system, and an online presence, and now you got practice in this online marketing, then that's the next thing, right? Try the real estate game, try the quote unquote gyms game. Yeah, that was fun. That was a lot of fun. Just putting the idea out there and having people being like, yeah, I'm interested. I believe in the idea of individualizing it per person and having these systems in place. At the end of the day, probably the wrong time to be alive to try it, just because of the entertainment aspect and the sacrificial aspect inside of fitness. And we're on the back end of the intensity era in fitness. Really tough time to be involved in, and on the pre-AI era, just a really tough time to be involved. I think 1997 would have been the time to kind of scale individualized program design gyms. That would have been a time to do it. Of course, all in hindsight, but hey, it is what it is. Because the pressures to do group fitness and make the job super easy for a coach. They didn't need to do any work, right? Didn't need to write designs, stand up, write shit on the board, whistle, pat people on the back next. It turned into a commodity. Fitness turned into commodities, a production, entertaining system. That was going on at this time. And we were saying, no, this is what we're going to do. Every person deserves their own program that's individualized for them. And how does a coach learn how to help them? Through our education. Does that mean that coaches needed to do our education in order to do that? No, but that's what we said. We said, oh, you got to do our education in order to offer this in your facility. We were never really truly successful as forcing people into that to get to the gyms. But hey, man, we did the best we could, and that'll get refined for the next decade. You'll see multiple different options that come through, and maybe we'll see something successful, quote unquote, on the back end. I don't think we will, but that's my personal opinion. But that was happening in 2016, 2022. We had, hundreds, I think, the number got into 500, 600, 700 clients online for our quote unquote online coaching program. As I said, 30 to 50 coaches per month signing up for CCP for years. And the starting point of this transition of using TrueCoach and then designing our own, I'll just say OPEX designed it, to start building CoachRx. And we started the piecemeals of that, right? Because this thing at the time that we were using was good, but we had lots of involvement. Remember, all of our online clients were using it, right? TrueCoach. And we got lots and lots of practice. We're like, yeah, this is really good. This is what we would do differently. So the main two things you would see differently in CoachRx today that's different than TrueCoach, it's the resilience in variability of the new product. And it's also language. The language is definitely more OPEX oriented. There could be other things, but that's how I see the new evolution of CoachRx relative to TrueCoach. And so this was happening in the global era for OPEX, where we practiced this online offering of that. Efficiency went through the roof. So you can imagine people were getting on calls with us once a month, hundreds of coaches from around the world to listen in to well, how do you make efficient design? How do you build a business? How do you market to people? How do you assess folks? So, we were inside of that game, right? We were, stepping up to the plate as an example during the COVID era, where people were at their homes or behind a Zoom screen. We were a company that was there, saying okay, we don't have answers, but we'll at least say something publicly, not in anything about the whole pandemic itself, but more around just how we're going to handle things here, And thankfully, I'm grateful for it. We had tools that we could offer people. Here's an online, tool. Here's some online education. Here's some principles to think about as we're going through this time. I think we offered some good ideas. Of course, there's downsides to that, right? During this time, everything went online. And that means the in-person thing, So the positives, CoachRx gets built up and boosted. And what happens to CCP? Just starts to diminish in terms of its flavor and its oomph. Because during this COVID era, nothing changed with, in my opinion, I think the quality has continually gotten better inside of CCP. Ironically, the more I've got away from it, it's gotten better. And at the same time, just education companies in the fitness universe were saying people are just not purchasing. But that should make sense to everyone now because everything got purely online and digitized with lots of options and lots of concepts of information. Right. So you had the person being like, hey, this is what I do at home during COVID and I look like this and this is what you could follow. And people are like, oh my gosh, it's free. This is simple online social media information. I can just do this myself. So you could see that it lost that, like the online world lost the coach client connection. Now, some may see it as like, oh no, it enhanced it because of the online presence. That's arguable. In my opinion, it's a race to the bottom for that in the online coaching world. It is my opinion, but it comes with 20 years of experience of that. It's just the way the market's going to go. It's happened in multiple other different markets, but it's the way it's going to go. And what I mean by that is that eventually coaches will be clamoring to charge like $25 a month for their program for individual clients. It's just going to eventually move down towards that area. But we're inside this global era of that whole process of seeing all these things occur. Now, I know as I pause and reflect on what I just said about this era from 2016, 2022, it may seem like a lot of things happened. It did. And I really can't take the time, in my opinion, nor should I, to go through all the stuff that occurred from grid to CrossFit competition drama to building of OPEX in our team to building the 15,000 square foot facility with 15 plus employees and a licensed OPEX North Scottsdale on site. In my brain, it was gargantuan. That doesn't really lend to the story that coaches in 2025 on LearnerX listening to the story. I mean, it's kind of interesting to know. It's not a monster play in terms of what you want, which is to continue to learn how to think about how this OPEX storyline leads to your value as a coach. Right? So you're doing any form of OPEX education, anything on LearnerX platform, or anything in the fitness universe. It's kind of nice to go through those eras. In this global era, I could just define it by saying so much happened. I'll say it now. I'm not sure if it'll ever occur, but I could actually take that era, 2016, 2022, and write books on it for the experiences in there. Because I just mentioned a couple there that you can just imagine how that went into the principal learning of physical training, right? Grid, CrossFit drama, OPEX, CCP refining, building of a business, gargantuan facility, online and in-person education. My gosh, it was like nonstop. And a great ride. But like all great rides, just like my 16-year-old just experienced as our Sweet 16 at Disney this weekend, all rides come to an end. What goes up must come down. Hence, we have the end, which would be, I called it the digital era, 2022 plus, because this is 2025, but I guess kind of an ending, but it's not really an ending. I call this the digital era because it truly is all digital. It's a digitized world. These are general statements, but it's a digitized culture. Fitness is digitized. Fitness is a commodity that is digitized now. Knowledge is digital now. And that's an important part of the aspect of the story here for not just the storyline, but how you as coaches are continuing to gain knowledge or gain any knowledge from, you may be looking at notes in CCP and say, where did this come from? Well, I hope you've heard something from the stories in 99, right? The stories in 2003 in my basement, like all those things, hopefully you could see led into, how that was manufactured, right? The academic platform to all the experience to the seeing all the things and all the experiences inside of fitness. You should then look at it and go, oh, kind of makes sense because they should just be principles that coaches could use in that relationship that you build with another person. And that for today, you should reflect on in this last phase of the digital era to really be okay with the fact that it just is what it is, And when I say that, I mean that as a practice, maybe we want to, summarize. If you were to think about take my position now of reflecting from 1992 to this point in time, right? 2022 plus, just saying it's just how things evolve. It's how things progress. And what do you want to do? It's a question that you have to ask yourself. What do you want to do? Do you want to resist that cultural, societal, very powerful pressure? Do you want to resist that for efficiency and making things easier and, participating in pickleball and e-bikes? Do you want to resist that? And if you do, what are the pluses and minuses and unknowns of that resisting in this phase that I'm calling the digital phase? And that's probably a good reflection to summarize on, because particularly to what OPEX, we went to a small facility, and then in the post-COVID world, we were like, we have people can work at home in their office or online, and they weren't necessarily in Scottsdale. And we're just like, we don't need this place. So now we don't have one. We actually don't have an OPEX HQ facility. I like to say CoachRx and OPEX is now in the cloud. It's not me. It's not personal anymore. It's just, and that's what I mean, that it's fully digital. Yeah, it's digitized, right? And it is my hope that it becomes one thing. Now, I know it may be difficult for some coaches to hear today, so you can listen to this in 5 years and reflect back. It may not become, but I want it to become one thing, just one thing, CoachRx. And it's all inside of that. Everything is inside of it. That doesn't mean it will become that. That doesn't mean it has to become that. I'll be an adult thinker about this and just, reflect on what I'm asking for a summary here in your reflection. That are you going to resist it, or are you going to get on board with and see how it could be helpful for what you want to do as a coach? And now, 2022, 2025, CoachRx is running well, running efficiently, got sustainable pieces inside of it. Has a great team leading it. Candace, Carl, and Casey are just like magical people, brains, humans, are really just taking it to a level that'll make, it all so beneficial for you as coaches. And we want to keep doing it. We want to keep growing it. What does growing mean for 2022 plus? Refining it to make sure your job in the current state of fitness is efficient and sustainable. Be a part of this artificial intelligence movement where we see how is it going to be helpful to make our job efficient. So at the end of the day, we could still be very personal with clients in the behavior concept, but maybe lend the program design and nutrition design stuff to the computer a little bit more. Maybe we could be a part of that. That's what I would ask. That's what I would mean by growing. And growing for me also at the end of the day is freedom. Freedom for people, freedom for humans. And I've often used the word autonomy. That would be growing, where we grow towards everyone recognizing that at the end of the day, we want humans, most humans that come in contact with us as coaches, to learn how to take care of themselves, to learn how to nourish themselves, to learn how to think for themselves, and to learn how to move without dependency on anyone or anything. That's what growing means. And if the whole story and all those coaches inside of CCP and all those clients online, all those blog followers, that all comes to that fruition at the end, I think it's a pretty good story. And if all those things that, although minimal, because at first this was expected to be 10 hours with like 7 different episodes, this 90 minutes has taught you anything that kind of connected to like, that was interesting, the historical context of like the location and what was going on at the time in fitness and professionalization, et cetera, and what CCP was doing or what OPEX was doing relative to CCP, and how you as a coach are like here in place. If that was helpful, then I'm grateful and I'm happy. That makes me content that you've listened to those points. So just in recap, I kind of took you through the academic phase, the vocational phase, the specialized phase, OPEX phase, USA phase, global phase, and digital phase of timelines that were from 1992 to 2025. To give you just a background as to what, if you're doing CCP right now, or if you're learning some LearnRx education, or you've heard of a coach that went through it and was teaching these things, and they're talking about things like principles. I hope I gave you a little bit of information as to where that came from and what role you as coaches had to play in the building of that and the moving of information. If it was broad and all over the place, it is what it is. I mean, that's what OPEX was. It wasn't like, I didn't create this course in 96 and we stuck to the same book the whole time, right? That's the downside of evolving and moving and shaking. I would love to reflect back and say we were like a mild Beatles. We actually didn't produce as much quality work, but you know what I mean? Like we're able to reflect on culture and the time and kind of say, this is what people need and this is what people want, and kind of blend it, relative to what was happening. If you're not connecting me, the Beatles did a great job of that. I would say they did. 100 years, people look back and be like, man, that was a fascinating time of fitness, right? Where 2025, where 40% of all Americans were over fat, yet they had done all this work inside of fitness and education. It'll be an interesting reflection. And yeah, I hope that, hope you can look back on this storyline and this tale and get something from it.